Okay, so welcome to OHASTA Tuesday, and welcome to this webinar that's going to be run by 3 amazing educators. So OHASTA is the Ontario History and Social Science Teachers Association. We are a volunteer organization of practicing history and social sciences teachers in Ontario's elementary and secondary schools. We have been serving our members since 1978. We would like to thank the Ontario Teachers Federation for the use of their Zoom platform to help us stay connected. We support further actions by members, school boards, and ministries of education to ensure that we are fully addressing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, especially number 62 and number 63. We believe that our members have an important role in learning and sharing with our students the historical and contemporary truths of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Canada. As an association, we are committed to building respectful relationships so that we can continue this work together. Now, just a few things to go over with Zoom. Your mute button, we ask that people stay muted for the presentation, but it's usually on your left-hand side, usually in the bottom corner. You can post any questions in the chat. We won't be addressing questions until the very end of the webinar as well. And who is sharing this amazing information? We have 3 educators here. We have Sara Faulkner, Elizabeth Freeman-Shaw, and Sarah Murdoch, who will be presenting this fabulous webinar today. Before they take over, there is a poll that I will send out right now, and we'll ask that you answer the 2 questions in the poll. We'll give you about 30 seconds or so to go ahead and answer the questions. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in about 5 seconds. And I'm going to share the results. So this is what we're looking for or looking at. Okay.
Great.
All right, take it away.
I think that's me. Right. Okay, so I think before we go into an activity, I think because in the next slide on, you're going to go into an activity exploring some of the themes. So I think maybe if we just advance the slide there. Good. There we go. So these are, when we were discussing it, these were the 3 top themes that came up for us, surrounding them around historical topics, surrounding them around concepts, or surrounding your themes around critical questions. So there is an example under each of those, but without further spoiling it for you, we're going to go into an opportunity to do a brainstorm Jamboard where you can come up with some ideas that might fit under any of those particular topics. So what types of themes might you come up with, or that you might have used, or that could possibly fit into any of those ones. So I think if we go to the next slide, right, then would we post the link in the chat, correct?
Yes.
To go to the Jamboard and brainstorm some of those ideas. So grab a sticky note and add to a theme that could drive a module or a component of the course, and we'll see what people will come up with.
So I'm seeing in the chat, there's currently too many people viewing the file. There's a limit on how many people can look at the Jamboard.
Yeah. So we'll maybe as soon as you've posted one or two things, you can sign out and someone else can pop in. One of the limitations.
There we go. Sorry, obviously we don't have, I don't know how many people are in this, but sort of our class size there. Yeah. We've got lots of ideas popping up on here.
And you can just pile up the stickies. If they're on top of each other, it's okay.
Sarah, is it possible for one of you to screen share the Jamboard so those of us who have logged out can still see it and not be logged into it?
Ah, good point.
I just tried to open it and view it to share it with everyone, and I'm not able to get into the file.
Oh.
Okay, so.
Well, let's give it another minute, and then when everybody's finished, we'll share it so we can all look as we're debriefing.
How are we doing there? Perhaps you could see whether or not, oh, there, got it up there. If everybody's had a chance to.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, there's some great stuff there.
Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes so that we make sure everybody has a chance to get in there. Oh my gosh, universe of obligation, that's one of my favorites in civics. Yep, power dynamics and activism and resistance. Caitlin, those are great. probably most of you have used Jamboard now, but if you are new to it, one little note is that if you highlight the whole thing, one person can delete it and you can't get it back. There's no recovery. So it's just a warning when you're working with students.
Yeah, because we lost our line or something. And that happened to me. So I can testify to the fact that a student deleted an entire Jamboard.
Okay, so let's start debriefing a little bit because we have so many great ideas, but by all means, please continue to go in and add ideas because we will share this with you after. So if you see things that you think had sparked an idea, then you can go back and play around with some of the different types of themes that we have. I'm curious, and feel free to unmic or just put your response into the chat. How easy was it to come up with themes really quickly? Just very easy, kind of hard, very easy. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting way of looking at history. And I think for people who have studied history and went through university and taken a lot of history courses, you know that a lot of history is taught at the university level thematically, but it less so has this been the case in the secondary panel. So I think we all understand how the themes can work. We're just less sure about how to implement those themes into our curriculum. Kimberly, I agree. And I never make a choice. I just keep adding to my list of possible themes. And I'm always rotating through new ones because you can tweak them. You can try something entirely new. It's just how you build your unit around those themes. And once you have a template you're comfortable with, you can swap out the themes all the time. Has anyone ever taught conceptually with the bigger themes before? We can't, no, yeah, Elizabeth, we can't do it all. But themes really help us to, I think, hone the content and be able to look at it in a really new and creative lens. So under historical topics, I think we have a lot of the traditional topics that we look at, but we tend to look at them chronologically, and then the themes are embedded in the chronology. And what we want to do is flip that and have the themes drive the chronology. So we're going to look at that reversal today and then give you some strategies and tools and hopefully a lot of ideas about what you could do. The students preferred chronological. I guess my kids have never, sorry, my students have never complained because I think they don't know any different. So if they're going to be in my class, I think, you know, they trust me to be able to take them on the historical learning journey. But of course, we teach chronologically within the theme. So they still understand periodization, they still understand how to make timelines and the value of timelines as tools, but it's a little bit different. And so I'm going to pass it over. So thank you again for all your ideas to Elizabeth, who's going to talk about why this is such a great idea and why all of you should switch over now. Elizabeth, you're on.
Okay, so we really just did a quick, we're not going to spend, there's so much that we have in the slideshow, so we're not going to spend a ton of time debating this at all. But between Sarah, and I, we just quickly brainstormed our reasoning behind why we do this. And I actually see John Myers in here, and I've known him for a long time. I have done thematic for my entire 32-year teaching career. Okay, there was a brief spurt back in, I don't know, 2001 when the revised curriculum came out, and I did chronology for a short term and then dumped it right away. So, so these are our reasons, right? So for my entire lifetime, the benefits are you can pick themes that allow you to address many overall expectations and multiple strands in one module. So that actually allows us to address that whole issue of expectation coverage, if I can say that, but you know the idea. Connections. I feel, and I've had many years of experience, that doing it thematically does allow students to make connections and see patterns within themes. There may be debate about that, but my students, they do see the patterns. It also allows you to do that deep dive as well. We discussed the idea that if you focus in on a particular, concept or topic or critical question, you can do a deep dive into the historical thinking concepts and surround them with the theme that you're doing. The age-old argument, and people put it in the chat, that you can and indeed do both. Certainly within my themes, they are presented in a chronology because, of course, we do need to give the students a sense of chronology as well. So, if you're doing any of the ones like Canada in conflict, you're going to approach it, or suffrage. You're not going to be all over the map there. And the final one, stuck in the wars, this is where you can let it go. Like, doing themes actually does allow you to address a broader spectrum of topics within your course, themes within your course, and actually address beyond 1949. So yeah, you just have to, and my theme song for a number of years has been Let It Go, but in letting it go, you can get beyond the wars and get to things that really matter to the students. Yeah, so I guess if we move on to the next slide then, Sarah, I think you're going to talk about the pedagogy behind this.
And just to throw in a little piece too, about why thematic models are really effective. If you are interested in decolonizing the curriculum and your program, and you are thinking about the need to understand Indigenous ways of knowing, chronology does not play the same important role in Indigenous ways of knowing history that it does for a European settler perspective. So it's another way to start thinking about how to decolonize your class and your history class, because in an Indigenous way of knowing, it's much more circular. So that's just an added pitch for why we think themes are great. Okay, so just a couple of pieces around the pedagogical thinking behind e-learning. Although we are mostly new, all of us, to e-learning, I bet most of us have taken a course online by this point in our careers. Teaching it's a little different, but the pedagogy supporting e-learning has been around for quite a while. So we thought we'd just quickly introduce the model that we've used, and Sarah and I have written e-learning courses for the ministry before, and this guides our instructional design. So questions to think about when you're looking at new ideas and strategies, similar to the way you would think about them in class. You might have traditionally picked up Barry Bennett, Beyond Monet, when you were looking for new ideas. Well, now you're going to go online. There's going to be so many different apps and ideas coming at you. So a quick checklist to sort of think through whether this app or this tool is worth your time, will help you teach, and will support learning is a good thing to do. And this was adapted from Jennifer Gonzalez's recent publication, The Teacher's Guide to Tech 2020, which you can order online for $25. It's great. She didn't pay me to pitch that. It's a really good book. So how to do tech without losing your mind. And these are some of the suggestions that she makes. And I'm not going to read them, but it's all about intention. So what is your intention with the activity, and how do you want students to learn from it? So otherwise you will get sucked down the rabbit hole of, oh my goodness, there are so many bells and whistles out there, and spend hours. I've been there, so I know, like days even, building things, and then thought this was not a good use of my time. So be intentional. Okay, and the next is just a very brief introduction to the SAMR model, which again, and it's the next slide, has been around for quite a while. Dr. Ruben Quintura And we put a little video in the slideshow of him explaining the model as well, but we're not going to watch it today because it's about 6 minutes and we just didn't want to take up too much of your time watching it. But basically, most of us started this journey this year at the substitution level. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just putting inert tools or worksheets and things up, a reading with some questions, because that was the amount of time we had to adapt to an online environment. But what we want to do is start moving up towards different types of learning. So augmentation, that's probably where most of my work is still sitting, right? It's where I use the technology and the tools and all the bells and whistles to make the learning interactive and fun for kids. Do they need it to learn? Not really. Whereas modification, kids are actually, there's a piece within using the technology where they are building their own knowledge and then eventually going up to the top where that becomes a strategy for them to then create their own next step in the learning process. So that's very brief, and it's well worth reading about because it does give you a lot of ideas as you start your learning journey and planning for your online courses. And great.
Yeah. So our next little section is on some strategies for organizing yourself in that online environment. And some of this is just based on my own experience with what transpired over the past few months. So I use what you guys would know as Brightspace. I still call it D2L in our board, but it's the same thing. So I thought I'd just share, if you probably just go to the next slide, then we can see on there. Okay, so one of the things that was pivotal that I found over the space of time was to be organized and have an organized workflow in whatever platform that you're using. So these are just some screenshots of different ways that I sort of worked through, and we called them landing pages. So everything, this would be locked at the top of Brightspace and D2L. And I would, if you haven't used anything, I think it's great. It's, if you're going to move to something and you haven't used one, I would endorse it. And it's not really that difficult if I figured it out. So the top left, we have one where it's sort of 2 weeks at a glance. So week 1 and week 2, and then hyperlinks to the slideshows and activities were all embedded into that. So the students could access everything there. So that's kind of an earlier one. Then we sort of moved on to having a landing pad that was sort of sequential, 1, 2, 3, and the kids would tap there. So you go through whatever was linked in 1 and in 2 and in 3. And within those, there would have been slideshows with video instructions, etc. You could move to sort of the Bitmoji office. So there's one, we're getting down to May, where, you'd play the video, which would be my virtual instructions. Our board, I just have to say that we weren't allowed to do the face-to-face live. So it was quite late. So I screencastified things. And then there was the link to the actual focus, which was immigration. There was a link to permission forms. And then finally, the one down at the bottom of the right is using a weekly planner type of format for organizing. And if we just hit the next slide, I think this one is really just, I tried to take like a little screenshot of my Brightspace, what the kids actually see. So some ideas, if you're using Brightspace, you can lock an agenda to the top of your screen, and then the kids see that first of all. And there's some new features that they've added, which by using a welcome widget defaults so that it always opens to that, and you wouldn't necessarily have to lock it, but it depends on your board. One of the things I learned through experience too, with between what the kids liked and doing exit surveys, is fewer words. So by doing some sort of planner or launching pad, then you don't have to type in tons of instructions. You can actually put a video one And yeah. Oh, and in the content, yeah. So if you're using the content in a Brightspace or D2L, then you can just add your own content for the online component. And the next slide is just something that I've been sort of playing with. There is a calendar that's embedded into Brightspace, but it's not very attractive. So this particular Google slideshow is a calendar slideshow that I'm going to embed right at the top of my Brightspace so the students would be able to follow the complex calendar that we'll have in here. And I think when Ohasta shares this, this slideshow, I've actually embedded the link to the source where this planner came from. And you could take it and build it yourself. So so the important thing really out of all of this, and I did exit surveys with my students in June, and organization through launching pads, few words, and something that's really sequential helps them to stay organized. So you can do it within D2L. So and I think Sarah, you're going to talk a little bit about the Google Classroom and organization next.
Yes. Okay. So just before I start talking about this, I'd like to give a shout out to two people that I work with all the time who keep me organized. And so you're actually going to see some evidence of their planning templates that I've developed, and that's Katie Whitfield and Safira Damji. So thank you both. And you will be able to see a little bit of your own work in these because they're so good. So I put links in here, but I'm going to put them in the chat. So if you want to check it out, you're welcome to do that. It should be visible. So long-term plans, especially when you're teaching thematically, I'm very broad because, again, as I said earlier, I like to keep things flexible in case I need to swap out a theme or change a mini unit. And I was so relieved that I decided to use this thematic approach last year when we went into crisis teaching mode and teaching remotely, because it allowed me to adjust my timetable so easily. Like within a couple of days, I had a plan. And people who were teaching chronologically, I think really struggled to try and figure out how they were going to teach the rest of the course with the limitations that were put on us. So thematically means that you can be as flexible as you need to and as responsive as you need to. And you'll see that in the outline that I've used, we're looking at
following the abrupt Canadian close.
We're looking at how we have in class in the morning and then afternoon online. So I'm kind of running two different programs. So big units in class and mini units online. But again, thematically allows you to do that and go deeper or scale it back. And then daily agendas. These came courtesy my friend Katie, who's with the Toronto District School Board. And I can put an example here. I taught summer school this year, specifically because I wanted to know what it was like to teach synchronously. And we taught full day summer school online. So we were basically online 7 hours a day, teaching with the kids in our classroom. It was exhausting for all of us, but it worked really well. So, okay, I'm going to try and share that. But the reason is, and again, I love Elizabeth's templates, and I was so blown away and a little bit embarrassed because I'm like, okay, I just use a Google table. But it has the same ability to keep you organized so that you basically every day you post up your agenda, you have your learning goals, your expectations, your success criteria, and then you break down your lesson. And timing really helps the kids as well when they're trying to manage all of this, because they will be very overwhelmed. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, there's a lot of challenges with Google Classroom in terms of staying organized, keeping the kids organized. So here are some of the things that I suggested, but if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to show you quickly some of the strengths and weaknesses.
Or just to interject here, I posted the links to your planners in the chat so people can take a look at them, which are awesome.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm
Yep.
sorry, I thought I did that and it didn't work. All right. And this was my everyday for the month of July, is the kids saying, nope, can't see it. Nope, not there. Well, we kind of muddled through to figure out how to make sure that they could see my screen, they could hear me, they could see the different worksheets and whatever I was giving them. It was just an ongoing struggle, but we laughed a lot because you can't really control what the technology is going to do sometimes. So Classroom is good because it's easy for us. It's easy to set up, it's easy to post everything, and it's easy to monitor students on. Meet is now embedded. So yes, Katie, it was an amazing idea because the kids can't find stuff in Google Classroom. We think it looks very organized from our end. From their end, it looks like a lot of different links and a lot of different things to click on, and they don't know what's what or what it's called. So when you put it all in one agenda and explain it, they go back to the agenda. They're not looking at Google Classroom to stay organized. They're looking at the agenda you give them. And again, I do like Google Classroom because it's simple and you can interact with the kids privately. And it was good for synchronous teaching and learning. But the difficulties are the kids get overwhelmed. They're constantly getting messages to their Gmail accounts. It's hard to do hands up, so the kids either have to unmute and yell or keep repeating themselves in the chat until I notice. Yeah, you can't pin things like you can in Brightspace, and I think that's really important. Like Brightspace is, we're comparing apples and oranges here, but it does, at least Google, give you a starting point. It doesn't have as many interactives and widgets like Brightspace does, and the scrolling gets really, really tedious if you're trying to find stuff. So those were just some of the things I was thinking about.
To sort of pop in too, if your boards probably support both, you can actually use Brightspace and still do Google Meets with your students, right? It's because I actually did that not with my classroom, but with my debating team. So yeah, so you can kind of combine the two if you're going to use those as well. And if you're on a Microsoft, if your board's Microsoft Teams, they're introducing a breakout function too for that. So that might be something you look into. And I think Sarah, you're on next for the.
Oh, the introduction. So yeah. So this is the section that we decided to spend the most time on because I don't know about other people, but my experience going to webinars so far, not OHASTA webinars, of course, but other webinars, is that there's not enough takeaway for me. I need stuff, I need templates, I need ideas that I can see direct links to, okay, by September 8th, I'm gonna have this stuff posted on Google Classroom. So that's what we're hoping to do in this next section, is give you a whole ton of ideas and templates that you can just cut and paste and turn into your own. And we saw a need for this, I think, on the Facebook posts, and it's really hard to share through Google, unfortunately, so we're trying to create a repository for you here. A couple of things to keep in mind if you are new to teaching online. Interactives are absolutely essential, and that's what we're going to look at. Guided inquiry, or the inquiry process, will save your life, because not only is it really one of the most important skills we need to teach, it is just so perfectly conducive to online learning as well. That the strategies allow you to condense things. So, you know, if you said, oh my gosh, I have 10 topics, that you can actually create a learning object so that the kids can look into each of those 10 topics instead of thinking, oh, how am I going to teach 10 things in one day? You can do it. And also thinking about what will work asynchronously as well as synchronously. Mostly you can use them for both, but some are more suited than others. And there are also things that will let you see how you can easily and quickly do assessment for and as learning. Almost everything we show you can be used for those purposes, and as final assessments if you wanted as well. But we're not actually going to go too much into that today because we didn't think we would have enough time. So we're talking about a CHC in pandemic times 2.0 perhaps. So on that note, I think, am I at the first? I think I have the first learning object that we have up. Strategy 1, concept maps. So these were ways that I tried to cover a lot of content in like a couple of hours. If I only had 3 hours a week, as we did in the spring, to teach, normally the home front would take me, what, 2 days, 3 days? And I usually teach the home front World War I and World War II back to back because we're looking at conflict and the impact of conflict on Canadian society. So this was a way for me to be able to have the kids go off and do some inquiry that was guided because I gave them links to what I wanted them to read. As Elizabeth said earlier, the kids, the students often struggle with a lot of reading online, and you will hear them, a lot of the feedback that I got, hear them say to you, there's so much reading and it, you know, they get headaches, it hurts their eyes. So trying to create little snippets of reading or use videos, so much better. So I just use this as a way to say, okay, these are all the different topics I want you to look at. You just click and read one paragraph, click and read or watch a little video. And then it became a concept attainment activity. So they had to organize the pictures with the topic and then try and figure out, you know, thematically what was going on. So it was a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and I used Google Draw. It took me, they can be a little time consuming, but this one, because I had all the resources already, it took me maybe an hour to make. But again, once you have this template, you can just cut and paste your own links into it. So this one worked really well. Then the kids finish it and they submit it, and you have evidence of their learning, and you can go in and give them feedback or just make sure that they're on track. So those are my concept maps. And the next one, timelining. We talked about this earlier. I do, in spite of teaching thematically, a lot of timelining and discussion about periodization with my students. And I can't actually imagine not teaching history or learning history without timelines because they're one of the oldest tools we have in our toolkit. So I tried something. This was an experiment with a Jamboard. And if you look in the top, there's the picture. I just searched something randomly and said, I don't even think I used the word timeline, chronology maybe. And this pretty picture came up. I'm like, oh, that would make a cute timeline. So I stuck it in there and I just sent it out to the students. Said, this is your timeline template. You're going to pick a topic. And we were looking at, we did a unit on health and well-being in Canada and the history of disease. And obviously it was relevant. So I thought, let's run. And so they looked at the history of inoculations in Canada and the impact of disease. So and the students just had so much fun with it. So they had all different diseases that they looked at and turned them into these little timelines. And this was one example, but students put pictures in, they put links to videos that they'd watched. And that was completely their own creative process. I gave them absolutely no structure around it apart from use this image, do some research, and turn it into a timeline. So you can see in my little emoji with my head blown up because I had no idea that they were going to come back and do this sort of thing. And I had about 20 of them, and they were excellent. So that's Jamboard. And you can use it synchronously because you can actually do it together. So the kids could collaborate in your classroom and create a timeline together, or you can send them off to do their own. Yeah, exactly. And that is why I love timelines so much, because I do use them for all of those purposes. And they're kind of fun to do, because it's, you know, we can do and we'll see some examples of the timelines with attitude, where you can ask students to start judging and thinking about what happened. But this was just a straight up, here, let's find out what happened. So anyway, I was just so blown away by their creativity. Yeah, this was just individuals. They picked a different disease and then researched the history of that disease in Canada and when the inoculations were introduced. And then we talked later about basically the long-term impact of inoculating in Canada. Yeah, it was interesting. And that's my timeline strategy.
Okay, so I think this is me. I'm just going to, we'll look at these two slides quickly because there's bigger versions, but when we were trying to look at how we could kind of engage students but get them interacting with content, because every day or every week we were using these slideshows, and we just wanted to also try to get a sense of what our students were thinking. So we started to create these Google slideshows where each student would essentially get their own copy, and they would interact in these slideshows, type in them, which we'll talk about later. And then they were submitting these slideshows to us so that we could get evidence of their learning, see what they were thinking, and also it would inform us to build the next day's lesson. So I'm just gonna, if you just wanna go to the next slide, we're gonna look at each one of the ones that are featured anyway. So just some ways that we used them was to rank and justify, to do true and false, to identify or use criteria to identify things like what was good evidence. So if you just want to go to the next one. So this was the one that we kind of were using for what is good evidence. So there's this lovely teacher out there, Ian Duncan, and he had this great activity on what is good evidence. So when we were trying to translate this into something that was interactive online, and we were looking at Vimy Ridge, we provided, I don't know, 6 pieces of evidence that students could look at. And if you are not in present mode, I don't know if you can do that. Can you do that, Raman? If you get out of present mode. Because when the students are looking and using the slideshow to interact, you want them not to be in present mode, because then you get all of this extra white space on the side. So you see on the left-hand side, that's where all the evidence is kind of located. And then students would use the criteria for good evidence, and they would pull over their top 3 pieces. So what are the 3 best pieces of evidence based on that criteria? And then quickly, as a teacher, when we looked at this, we were able to quickly identify, you know, who maybe had difficulty applying criteria, or maybe we need to go over good evidence again. So it kind of gave us that quick sense, but also it was, you know, a critical kind of challenge where they had to rank and read through those things. The next slide is just looking at using concept of cause and consequence, but trying to get across this idea of not all causes are weighted equally. So the idea where they drag these causes, the closer to the center, the more weighted the cause. The further away, the less significant the cause. So a quick way to identify, and also leading on to this, you can have kids or students justify the cause they put closest to the center. So just these ways where you're just getting students to not just read and consume content, they're actually, you know, interacting with it and making these decisions. The next slide, we had a real hard time coming up with how to do living graphs. So this is just some stuff on the bottom. There was a reading that kind of went along with all of these events, and they were to basically drag them to where they felt they fit on the living graph. And again, just trying to get them to start thinking about it. And then when you see the slideshow at the end of the day, or during, if you're doing it live, then you can quickly kind of identify what they're seeing as positive, negative, And if there are some that are misplaced that were clearly negative or clearly positive, then too, you can also identify and look at some, any misconceptions or clear up some, add more content or detail the next day. So on the next slide, this was an activity that we had tried, and we, it was on women. And again, they were looking at the criteria for historical significance. So they were doing some research and investigating a variety of topics. They were reading, watching, and decoding something. And then in the very end, they were looking at turning points. So if we were to look at these for historical turning points for women, what would they be? And then again, making them justify their turning point. And if this is not in present, then in the turning point in the explained section, there are little boxes, text boxes, where students type right in. So they're just going to drag over their turning point and then type in their rationale. So it's almost, I guess, like a clickable organizer in a sense, where you can quickly look at this, is because this was the issue, a difficulty, right? This was one of those things, because you're not with the students every day. You know, when they're in your classroom, you walk by them and you can look at the work that they're doing and you see where they're getting, where they're kind of getting stuck. But in this case, you don't see them. And I don't know how your students were doing, but you know, we had students that were on at 2, 3 in the morning doing their work. And so the next day, this was just a nice way for me to kind of get a sense, but also provide feedback. Yes.
Did you see some of the questions there, Sarah?
Well, I only saw the last one. So for the ranking activities, supporting evidence needs to be provided. Yes. So for each one of those topics, there was a slide that had something they could read, something they could watch, and something they could decode, whether that be a political cartoon or an image. Literacy supports are required. I don't know if all school boards have this, but we have Google Read and Write. So that's an option to get any written material read to students. Oh, I lost my question. I'm not sure if there was more to that. But again, all of these skills were slowly kind of taught in the beginning. So how do you decode an image, right? So looking at all pieces of primary source, you know, we often use the SHAG resource in terms of how the questions that you ask to decode a primary source, but they could use any of those pieces of evidence. And oftentimes, sometimes we would give them three or four pieces of evidence, and they could choose 2 out of the 4. So maybe they just want to watch a video today, and they want to look at a political cartoon. Some students prefer reading, so that was a way for them to gather the knowledge that they needed in order to.
I think it's important to point out that these tools and strategies are all embedded within our lesson plans. So, you know, we're just sharing in a really quick way these interactives that you can adapt. But of course, you'd be planning for supporting all your learners. I teach a lot of English language learners, and so I'm constantly supporting them around their language skills, but you know, these are just little tidbits that you can then pull into your lesson plans however you like.
That's right. Yes,
I just
one section or one aspect of an entire lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something else to remember too. I mean, I see some of the comments in terms of guiding the students. These examples are taken from when we were fully remote and we had no live synchronous teaching. So, and the other thing we did have is we had a month with our students. So some of the historical thinking concepts and activities had already been done face-to-face with students, but all of these like little slides you're seeing are part of a much larger piece that unpacks them. And in terms of literacy, there was always like a read, a listen, a watch, and different strategies. But yeah, I mean, the challenge was that this wasn't face-to-face. So yeah, but they're part of a bigger picture there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one more, I'm not sure. Oh, and then this one was used as a diagnostic. So they just, based on what they knew before they even started looking at immigration, they would drag them true and false. They just click, drag them to wherever they think they go. But then at the end of the lesson, they came back to these and they you know, moved with them around to whatever was true and false. And they were also given the option to correct the false basically to correct the misconception and to make it true. So this was just a quick way for a diagnostic to see what students were thinking before the lesson even started. Yeah. And that template actually comes from a teacher from the United States, and her name is Amanda Sandoval. So if you Twitter, she's great to follow because she's always trying to come up with engaging ways to, and she teaches most ELAs, I think, in her class. So she's always looking at ways to get students to either be kinesthetic while they're in the classroom, vocabulary building, and interactive. So she's great to follow. Oh, I'll type it in there. Sorry.
Yeah, you can put her contact information.
Yeah.
There was also comment just in terms of time. And yeah, I mean, we were on lockdown at home. So, and I don't know about, probably both Sarah's too, pretty much workaholics. So yeah, it's not, in this situation, I can't see a lot of things new happening. But yeah, it is time consuming for some of them, which is why Twitter is your friend and social is your friend for this, because that's one of the benefits, I think, of the pandemic, is I have made so many contacts online where they've been sharing great resources, and they just put their Google link and you can go in there and fix it up and turn it into something that maybe fits into your lesson. So thanks so much to all of the people over Twitter who have been sharing resources as we have. So I think if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to speak briefly about a couple other things that you can do as tools. So our board gave us free access, or somehow, I don't know if it's Pear Deck or if it was our board, to Pear Deck. So Pear Deck is an app that you can add on to your Google Slides that allow you to add interactives that the students can write on, draw on. There's like little drag and drops, do little quizzes, and I figured it out. So I always use it. If I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. I'm not sure if it's still fully available, but if you have it, it was great. And the one thing I would say that because we weren't teaching synchronously, right? And we were asynchronous, when we were using Pear Deck, I would have to go back and check and see what the students had added. But if you were actually online with your students at the same time, then Pear Deck allows you that if I had that ideas for a criteria slide up, I would actually see the students contributing to it. So it's really awesome. And this like Sargon agent of change, that's a draggable. So I would commend Pear Deck, and they've added features. Before you could not write comments on what a student, so now you can actually type a specific comment on a student's response. So they've added some other cool features onto Pear Deck. So yeah, and my students actually like Pear Deck, surprisingly enough, even though it wasn't sort of live. I think we go to the next one. So I would commend Pear Deck, and I don't know if anybody has used it or tried it, but it's a cool thing. Another strategy that I would suggest too is video interaction with the students. So there's different ways that you can add that. You know, we're talking about reading, watching, listening. If there's Edpuzzle, and I haven't actually tried this yet, but it's a way where you can actually incorporate a video and embed questions as the students go through it, right? And I haven't necessarily done that. I use Screencastify a lot for myself in terms of narrating lessons and embedding those into the slides for instructions. But students can also use Screencastify to make their own little videos, which is similar to Flipgrid, which is another one that students can use to do videos and share. So the benefits are that videos add engagement and appeal, and especially if you're not able to do live presentations in your class, then a Flipgrid or Screencastify allows your students to sort of videotape themselves, making a pitch or something that would be like a presentation. Yeah, so this slide just actually, and I put a little image so Flipgrid is an extension, and the little thing at the bottom just shows there's Google Read and Write. That's Screencastify there. And that's Pear Deck as well. So Flipgrid, you can just add on as an extension. So there are lots of things. The top image there is just, I just used, it was supposed to be beach day. This is the day all the kids skip and go to the beach the first Friday of June. So when they're at home not going to the beach in Niagara, I just did a little reminder of what they were supposed to do. So within here would have been a screencastify of a little, you know, sort of touching base with the students. I know you'd rather be at the beach on this day, but here we are there. So that's sort of video interactions. And I think, I'm not sure who was talking. Oh, Sarah F, this is you. You're going to talk about your activities for your online collaboration with Padlet, et cetera.
Okay, I think again, most people are now familiar with the different tools that we have so available to us for online collaboration. Padlet is good, but apparently I'm logged out now because I made too many and didn't pay for it. So there is a point where they will cut you off, but it is good. You can organize it and create mind maps. It's very flexible and it's free to a certain point. Jamboard again, and I love this image of Elizabeth's students' Jamboard because of course you can draw and make connections between all of your stickies and images. And unfortunately her board was deleted, but she took a picture first. So that's just to give you a sense. Yeah, it's messy, but it's really cool. It's like having a big paper in the middle of a group of desks, and it works really well. And then just the old-fashioned Google Doc, assigning students a group. Say, okay, here's your case study, for example. Here are your questions. These 5 people are going to do this one, and they get into the doc and they work together, and then they can use the chat to plan and share their ideas, and it works really well. And you can also supervise it very easily. All of these things, with Padlet you can't as much, but you can go in as well. And so if something inappropriate pops up, you delete it right away and address it. You can chat with the students in their chat, in their docs. So a really simple but effective way to collaborate online. And there's other, I know there's other apps out there, but these are the ones that I stick
I think this one's me. So another feature or tool that we kind of used at one point was Google Forms as a quick way to gather information. So this was about a virtual tour home front during World War I and World War II. And students kind of watched the video and they answered several questions in this Google form, kind of looking at what they learned from the video, what was surprising. So just some general questions to get a sense of what they were thinking. But then they were given an option, which I know Sarah is going to talk about next, of just digging deeper. So this is where this other, and I've already kind of talked about this idea of a master slide. So there's lots of, I guess, videos out there on how you can make master slides, but you basically, in Google Slides, go into the edit master slide, and everything that you put on this is not movable. So you can kind of add text or features in the background, and students can't manipulate those things. But then you can also add a text placeholder, which then appears as a text box for students to fill in. So that's where that pink arrow is pointing. So students got to choose from, I guess, 8 different topics. And then we gave them some evidence to explore, whether it be a video, an article, it could be an interactive web page or an infographic. And then from there, they kind of added this information of new things that they learned in terms of digging deeper and what does this mean? What does this reveal about Canada during this time period? But Google Forms can also be used as a quiz. So there are features that are built into Google Forms where you can choose the quiz feature, and then you can have it where students can't even open any other windows while they're doing this quiz. So there are little features like that. And you can also give them hints because you're not there with them side by side. You can also have them prompted if they don't answer the question or a certain word is not included in their answer. So there's little features built in to kind of redirect students. So even though you're not there with them, you can kind of at least provide them with some of that support. Yeah, I don't know what the next slide is. Oh, and that's just the example of the slide. So if you wanted to use it as a template, and in the bottom left was just a copy of the Google form that we used just to gather some information.
So I pasted a link to that Google form in the chat if they wanted to check. So it was really just if the students watched, when they watched that video on internment, then they completed the Google form, and it was a way just to assess, a check-in to see that they had watched the short video clip. It was like where each of these clips were actually on monuments to the topic. So where are we in Canada? Because this is part of a virtual tour of Canada on the home front. So different monuments, that was the theme of this particular activity that the students were doing. So that was a way to check in. And something else that was cool about the Google form is you can just download it as a Google, the equivalent of an Excel spreadsheet. So a Google Sheet, and it lists you can see the students and you can see the responses to each of the questions. So it's a really good quick assessment tool of, the kids watching. So.
And forms are also really good for asking students to rank significance and then explain it, because you can set up a little, on a scale of 1 to 10, and then explain, if they thought it was historically significant for these reasons or whatever. It works really well.
Yeah, that's and as when you're going back to read the responses, it's all nicely in one spot. Time is always an issue online when you're looking at student evidence of learning, and it's nice and neat.
And we thought we'd talk briefly about guided and open inquiries. And you've seen examples of how we do some of the guided inquiries in the other templates. So we provide the link that we want the students to go to, but it can also work that they can just have choice. So give them a topic, ask them to walk through the inquiry process on their own and do their own research and consolidate it. In the example I gave, they just consolidated in a Google slide. The nice thing about slides is that if the students are all working in it together, again, you can see what they're doing, right? So it's another way when you're working remotely to see who's actually doing their work or not, and you can give feedback while they're working on it really easily through the comments. Other things that I threw in there that I think are kind of fun for inquiries, you could, as a teacher, you could create an inquiry using Twine, which is almost like a choose your own adventure app. It is time consuming, but it's pretty neat. And it's very easy once you get in there to put your pictures and your questions and your text in, and then give it to the students to basically choose their own paths through the narrative. But they can also use it for a product of their own if they want to on an inquiry. And then online field trips using virtual museums, Google Earth. I have one in here somewhere that I did for CHY, and it's all done through Google Earth. So students pick a location in the world, and then they go on their own journeys, and then they create a tour and will take us on a tour after the fact. And Google Earth is so sophisticated now that really you can go in and take your students anywhere on the planet. So that's a lot of fun. And as well, it works really well for asynchronous learning. So if you need your students on the days they're not with you to do something at home, then guided inquiries or even open inquiries are a really good tool that will keep them working for 2 to 3 hours easily. Yeah.
Can't remember if this was, so the previous slide had that your choice. And this is, so the guided or open inquiries. So it said, so each of these, the students were to pick one, and then when in picking one, it took them to an inquiry on that particular battle. So if we go to the next slide, then this is where it would take them. So this was our slide. So watch this video, read this information, decode the primary sources, and then as they did that, they would sort of fill in. So that's just another example of an inquiry that we did. that allowed choice. Keep going. Speaking
Choice
of
boards.
choice, yeah, speaking of choice boards, here is one. I think Katie, you were asking, had mentioned about listening in podcasts, and there's so many great podcasts out there. I actually did one, and this is from it's not the grade 10s. Actually, if we flip to, so in this choice activity, the students chose between listening, watching, or reading. And if we go to the next slide, this is a bigger version of it. This was it, right? So, you know, and I attached like a screencastify video for instructions for the students that week. And then this is what they had in front of them. So very simple template, but then they just had to pick one. And so when they clicked listen, it took them to a whole series of pre-selected podcasts that took me hours, I have to say, or videos or articles on, and the focus was flourishing civilizations. So it's not the grade 10 history. And then I think if we go to the next slide, then they completed, so this is a fillable slide. And there was a different one. So this is the one for podcast. There was one for the video, and there was one for an article if they chose that. And then they would just submit this. So yeah, so that's another way where you're focusing on
Okay. So I'm not sure. I think everybody might be back. So just being aware of the time, I want to thank the people that were in my breakout. We had a really good time and a great chat. I just really want to quickly go through each of the groups. And if you just want to share briefly one big takeaway, that'd be great. We're trying to look at less than a minute share so that everybody has an opportunity. But if group one, if anybody from group one wants to just unmute and share what they were talking about, that'd be great.
No one ended up going in group one.
Oh, okay. Well, group two, that was my group. So I don't know if anybody else from my group, from the group I was in, I don't know, Kimberly or. Take it on, Kimberly.
Yeah, I can. I mean, so we were talking about Jamboard and timelines, and we got stuck, not stuck, but we started somewhere realistic about Jamboard and the delete ability, and that we just talked about some strategies to maybe overcome that. And we were saying maybe as part of instructions for students, if they're working on Jamboards, we tell them to take a screenshot of it every so often when they get to a critical point that they would want us to see, just in case it gets deleted. And talking about different ideas for using timelines and looking at, Sarah, I think you brought up the meanwhile elsewhere idea, or looking at looking at a date and looking at what was going on in the world. So in 1919, for example, there's the Pear conference, and there are two different perspectives to that, and having students lay that out on a Jamboard. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Does anybody from group 3 want to share?
Yeah, that was us.
Yay! Hi,
Hi, everybody. This has been great. I'm really enjoying it. So we looked at click and drag, and a bunch of ideas came up about like different places you could use this kind of strategy, like inventions of the 20s and 30s, rank which one was most important, or like if you were just looking at sort of a technology as a whole theme, you could do that too. Causes of anything. So World War I, looking with the cause bubble. And then instead of doing like a true false, you could do like sort statements into fact and opinion. That might be a good one too. That was a great idea. And then suggestion also that you could use this click and drag strategy using like a diamond organizer. And I put a link in the doc to what those look like if you haven't seen them, because they're really fun too. I like them.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody from group number 4? Oh wait, was there nobody in group 4? Not sure.
Doesn't look like anybody did group 4.
Okay, how about group 5?
So we were looking at video interactions, talking about TikTok and how we can create our own TikToks, because TikTok's probably just never going to be approved by school boards. But we actually like the idea of the students being able to maybe narrate over videos so that they can ask the questions. So maybe the task is, here's a little video, so now it's your turn. So what questions would you ask, so that when other students look at this video, they can stop and think, or they can learn. So rather than the teacher guiding and narrating, which is what we would do in class, pause, ask a question, get the students to do the videos and stuff.
That's neat, I like that. Okay, group number 6.
It's myself and Rebecca, so I don't know if she wants to chat there.
Go for it, Elizabeth.
Oh, well, we were doing I think that was us. Yeah. So we thought the collaborative tools came up, and again, it was Jamboard or Padlet. So we just thought that the strategy is similar. You just sort of switch it up around a different focus. It could be around a theme like historical thinking concept. I guess maybe allows for student voice, that maybe goes into the other column there. I have used Padlet for students to introduce themselves at the beginning of a course. Or you could use Jamboard or Padlet for brainstorming what they know about a topic before. It was mentioned that it could also serve as like a parking lot where kids can post questions, the old Post-it notes that you would actually physically do in the classroom, sort of a way to engage. So you could put an image on it and have students engage sort of as a lesson starter where they can provide some feedback, or can actually even be deeper where they dig in and investigate and analyze a source or a photo or something like that. So those are a couple things that we came up with.
Awesome, thank you. I don't think anyone was in group 7, not sure.
No, no one from group 7.
Okay, so group 8. That was the Choose Your Own Adventure field trip.
We actually just started talking about D2L because the 2 teachers that were in my group, they were new to it. So we're sort of discussing those types of things and how to enhance our PD further than teachers who are just learning to teach other teachers. So we sort of got stuck talking about platforms and things like that. One of the teachers was wondering about a whiteboard app that she could use in her class for a more collaborative, because like obviously with the social distancing, whether they're online or in the classroom and how that would work. So we're sort of talking about, obviously in Google, you can do that. You can do that in Office 365 where the kids can collaborate through PowerPoint or Microsoft Word. And they can also chat to each other on the side when they're put into their own small groups. We sort of just talked about those types of things.
Oh, that's great, because we were having the same conversation of students being at home and in class and how we can set up some collaboration. Thank you, that's great.
Oh, you're welcome.
Group number 9. Oh, yeah, group number 9, click and drag. No, maybe not. Okay.
Well, I had asked Erin if she wanted to speak, and she said yeah, but I can do it if she's having like mic issues or something. So we.
Oh, sorry, Daniel. I thought you said. I thought you meant you were gonna talk.
Okay, I can talk. It's okay.
Okay.
So we also had click and drag. We also talked about the causes of world wars or causes of anything. We talked about almost doing like a both sides now kind of chart. So dragging to, for example, like whether the 20s roared or not. So drag evidence to it roared, to it did not roar, positive or negative, and then come to a conclusion at the end. Timeline for indigenous rights. What else did we say? Oh, 4 corners, which was Erin's idea for click and drag. So different statements that you, I guess, could agree, disagree, strongly agree, strongly disagree. And then the last idea we had was continuity and change. So what stayed the same, what's different now?
Awesome. Thank you. Oops. So group number 10. Is that right?
Yep. Hey, so we did the fillable slides for group 10, and what our group thought we could do with that is either as an end of unit consolidation, if we're, for example, have themes for the unit to check for understanding to see if they understood how the theme linked with the course or the topic for that day. So we had some ideas of, for example, post-World War II, Indigenous events, international events, some hotspots and international connections. It can work as an assessment for learning and check for understanding. And some strategies we had were to outline what we expect of the kids on that master slide or in the fillable slides. So outlining, for example, font size, if you want them to use images, the amount of text you want on there, if you want full sentences or point form, if you want, for example, at least one example from the lesson topic or theme for them to add in there, that could work as well.
Thank you. In group 11, Google Form.
Sure, I can speak to that with Vanessa and Mike. So we talked about like really simple responses. So the replacement for a worksheet is having students fill out a Google form. I shared about the advantage of like, you can put a check-in at the beginning of it. So we used to often do it as like an attendance check-in as well, particularly if we weren't having a Google Meet until the middle of the week, and I wanted to make sure that the students had actually checked in. So that was really helpful. It also is helpful to, I mean, you could obviously tell immediately how many of your students have completed a task, because when it goes to Google Sheets, you know what has been completed. We talked about it as in the form of like formative and summative assessment. Mike shared about the fact that Google Forms are really helpful to know how, like, to help with planning. So it could be like, we've been using these strategies in the unit. What are the ones you like? What are the ones you don't like? So that kind of is helpful to teachers in the department to know that, but also is helpful when, if you were planning a conference with a student, you could ask them some preliminary questions so that they've started to think about how they would interact with you if you were to have a one-on-one conversation with them following. And there's a big move, obviously, when we move to this synchronous, asynchronous around metacognition, and how do you break up that 3 hours and 45-minute block by having students doing meta. And the bonus of Google Form is that the students can't change the formatting of it. So what's helpful about that is that they could probably sit in their desks and do them on their phones, and you would get immediate data.